The emergency beacon screamed through the void, its signal piercing layers of cosmic dust and radiation that would normally swallow such transmissions whole. Roy Kim jerked upright in his chair, nearly spilling the energy drink that had been keeping him awake through another monotonous night shift. The frequency was old, almost ancient by galactic standards, and it carried encryption patterns he'd only seen in historical archives. "Commander Grant, you need to see this," Roy called out, his fingers dancing across the holographic display. The patterns made no sense. This encryption belonged to the Cajun Collective, but the Cajuns never called for help. They were one of the oldest spacefaring species in this sector, proud to the point of arrogance. They'd been the ones who tried to quarantine Earth 50 years ago, claiming humans were too dangerous and primitive to join galactic society. Olivia. Grant moved from her office to the communications bay with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 3 decades in space. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her weathered face showed every year she'd served protecting humanity's borders. She leaned over Roy's shoulder, studying the cascading data. Her expression shifted from curiosity to shock in the span of 3 seconds. "Is that really what I think it is?" she asked quietly. "If you think it's a Cajun distress call using their old military emergency protocols, then yes," Roy replied. He pulled up the decrypted message and they both read in silence. "A civilian convoy, 17 ships carrying over 4,000 Cazians, under attack in the hollow reaches by Ravager clans. Life support failing on 3 vessels. Defensive shields at 12%, and then the words that made Grant's blood run cold. Requesting immediate military assistance from any available forces, including human vessels. Ambassador Lyrian arrived moments later, summoned by Grant's urgent call. The Cajun diplomat moved with the fluid grace common to her species, her iridescent skin catching the soft blue light of the station's displays. She'd served on Outpost Meridian for 5 years, working to build bridges between her people and humanity. Those 5 years hadn't always been easy. The memory of the quarantine incident still stung for both sides. "Show me," Lyrian said, and her voice carried none of its usual musical quality. Roy played the distress signal again. Lyrian's skin shifted from its normal blue-green to a pale gray, a clear sign of distress among her kind. "That's High Merchant Vanna's convoy. She was transporting colonists to the outer territories. Those are families, Commander, children." Grant made her decision in under 10 seconds. She'd fought in the contact wars, been there when humanity proved to the galaxy that quarantine wasn't going to work. She'd seen what humans could do when pushed, but she'd also seen what humans could do when someone needed help. "Roy, open a priority channel to Earth Command. Maximum encryption. Patch it through to my ready room." The conversation with Admiral Patricia Stone lasted 27 minutes. Grant laid out the situation with military precision. Stone asked the hard questions. What's the strategic value? Could this be a trap? How many of our people would we be risking? But Grant knew her old friend well enough to hear what Stone wasn't saying. The Admiral was already running battle calculations. "The Cajuns tried to cage us once," Stone said finally. "They thought we were monsters who'd bring war to the peaceful galaxy. Maybe it's time we show them what monsters actually do when the innocent need protecting. I'm authorizing deployment of the Iron Tempest. Full battle group. We'll show those Ravager scum what happens when they threaten civilians in our neighborhood." Grant felt something shift in her chest. The Iron Tempest, humanity's legendary war fleet, 400 vessels strong, hadn't deployed at full strength in over 30 years. The last time they'd moved together, they'd ended a sector-wide conflict in 16 days. The galaxy still told stories about that campaign, usually in whispered tones around dimly lit bars. "How fast can you mobilize?" Grant asked. "The lunar shipyards can have the first wave launched in 6 hours. Full deployment in 18. We'll need your station to serve as forward command until we arrive." Stone paused, and Grant could hear the smile in her voice. "Olivia, remember what you told me after the Battle of Crimson Void? You said that being strong means having the power to help, not just the power to hurt." "I remember," Grant replied softly. "Those Cajuns are about to learn that lesson the hard way." "Stone out." Grant returned to the communications bay where Roy and Lyrian waited. The ambassador looked small somehow, diminished by worry. "Will they help?" Lyrian asked, and her voice was barely a whisper. "They're already launching," Grant said. She pulled up the tactical display, showing the space between Outpost Meridian and the hollow reaches. "Your people will hold out. They're tough. They survived thousands of years in space before we even left Earth. They can survive a few more days. Lyrian's skin shifted back toward its normal color, though worry still clouded her eyes. Commander, my people have said terrible things about yours. We feared you. Some still do. Fear isn't always wrong, Grant replied. Sometimes it's just pointed at the wrong target. The Ravagers are about to learn what humans do to bullies, and your people are going to learn that the scariest monsters in the galaxy can also be the best neighbors you'll ever have. High above Earth, in the orbital construction yards that ringed Luna, alarms began to sound. Crews scrambled to their stations. Massive warships that had sat dormant for decades roared to life, their reactors burning bright enough to be seen from the planet below. The Iron Tempest was waking up, and the galaxy was about to remember why Deathworlders earned their fearsome reputation. News traveled fast through the galactic information networks, faster than any ship could cross the void between stars. Within hours of the Iron Tempest deployment, every major civilization within 20 sectors knew that humanity's war machine was on the move. On the Trilaxian homeworld, 300 light-years from Earth, the High Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 11 years. Council Speaker Mora stood before the assembly, her 3 arms gesturing emphatically as she spoke. The Deathworlders are deploying in force. 400 warships. Our intelligence suggests they're heading toward the hollow reaches. A holographic display showed the projected course of the human fleet, a brilliant red line cutting through neutral space like a blade. Should we warn the Ravagers? Asked Junior Council Member Pell, his youth showing in the naive question. Several senior members made gestures of derision. Warn them of what? Replied Elder Koss, his aged voice dripping with dark amusement. That they're about to face creatures from a world that should not exist? That they've provoked beings who evolved dodging predators that could bite through steel? Let them learn the lesson we learned 30 years ago. Moore remembered that lesson well. She'd been there during the quarantine crisis, when the Trilaxian fleet had joined the Cajun-led coalition to contain humanity. She still had nightmares about what happened next. The human response hadn't been diplomatic protests or economic sanctions. They'd simply stated that no one was caging them, and then they'd proved it. The Battle of Crimson Void lasted 18 hours. The coalition lost 47 ships. The humans lost 3, and all 3 were repaired and back in service within a month. Across the galaxy in the hollow reaches, High Merchant Vanna huddled with what remained of her convoy's leadership. The meeting took place aboard the merchant vessel Sacred Wing, the only ship still maintaining full life support. Around them, 16 other vessels struggled to survive, their power reserves draining with each passing hour. Outside the thin hulls, Ravager ships circled like predators, occasionally firing shots to remind the Cajuns who controlled this territory. Water rations are down to 1 cup per person per day, reported Supply Master Dern, his normally proud bearing bent with exhaustion. If we reduce power to the agricultural bays, we can extend life support by maybe 4 days. Do it, Vanna ordered, though the words tasted like ash. Those agricultural bays represented 2 years of preparation, seeds and supplies meant to start a new colony. Now they'd become a luxury they couldn't afford. She looked at the communications officer. Any response to our distress call? 1 High Merchant. From the humans, the room fell silent. Vanna's people exchanged glances full of complicated emotions. The humans, the species they'd tried to isolate. The species their propaganda had painted as violent primitives who'd destroy galactic peace. And now those same humans were coming to help. How long until they arrive? Vanna asked quietly. Admiral Stone's message said 3 days at their current speed. 3 days. Vanna did the math in her head. They'd be cutting it desperately close. Send a response. Thank them and transmit our exact situation. If they're willing to risk their people for us, they deserve to know what they're flying into. Meanwhile, in the command nest of the Ravager Mothership Blood Prize, Warlord Krellis was receiving very different news. His scoutmaster Thren stood before him with visible fear, his red scales pale with stress. You're certain of these readings? Krellis demanded, his massive frame leaning forward in his throne of scavenged ship parts. Yes, Warlord. Our long-range sensors detected the fleet 6 hours ago. The energy signatures match human vessels. There are hundreds of them. Thren pulled up a tactical display. The sheer number of contacts made Krellis pause. They're moving through radiation fields that would kill most species. They don't even slow down. Krellis had heard the stories about humans, of course. Every pirate and raider in this part of space had. But stories were just stories, told by losers who needed excuses for their failures. He'd built his empire by taking what he wanted and destroying anyone who got in his way. Some soft merchants and their Deathworlder friends weren't going to change that. Let them come, Krellis growled. We outnumber these Cajuns 10-1. We'll finish them before the humans arrive, take what we want, and scatter. They won't find us in the nebula. Thren looked like he wanted to argue, but wisely kept silent. Krellis had executed the last subordinate who questioned his judgment. Aboard the human dreadnought Relentless, Captain David Ortiz reviewed the tactical briefing with his senior staff. The ship's briefing room was purely functional, all steel and screens, built for efficiency rather than comfort. Dr. James Wu, the fleet's xenobiologist, was walking them through Ravager combat psychology. They fight for personal glory, Wu explained, highlighting sections of his report. Each ship operates independently, trying to claim the best prizes. There's minimal coordination beyond basic pack tactics. They're aggressive and fearless, but they lack discipline. Sounds like they've never fought a real military force, noted Commander Lisa Hayes, the Relentless's tactical officer. They're used to preying on merchants and isolated colonies. Exactly, Wu confirmed. They also have no experience fighting Deathworld species. Their weapons, their tactics, their entire combat doctrine assumes enemy crews operating under standard galactic physical limitations. Ortiz smiled grimly. Standard galactic limitations meant pulling at most 3 gravities of acceleration before crew started blacking out. Human ships routinely operated at 7 gravities, with pilots pushing 10 or more in combat situations. It meant reaction times measured in full seconds, while human crews drilled to respond in fractions of a second. It meant species that had never evolved to be pursuit predators trying to track beings whose ancestors had run down prey across endless savanna plains. They're about to get an education, Ortiz said. What about the Cajun convoy? Are they going to hold out? It'll be close, replied Hayes, checking the updated estimates. They're tough, give them credit. Most species would have surrendered by now, but they're running on fumes. If we're delayed even 12 hours, some of those ships will lose life support. Then we don't get delayed. Ortiz stood, commanding attention without effort. Pass the word to all ships. I want every crew at battle stations 6 hours before we reach the nebula. We're going in hot and fast. The Ravagers have been terrorizing this sector for years. Time to show them what happens when they pick on someone under human protection. Admiral Patricia Stone watched her fleet move through space from the flag bridge of the carrier Indomitable. 200 vessels in the first wave, with another 200 following 12 hours behind. It was overwhelming force, she knew. Probably more than needed for a pirate clan. But Stone hadn't risen to command Earth's fleet by taking unnecessary risks. She'd brought enough firepower to handle anything they might encounter and still have reserves. Her strategic officer, Commander Neil Park, joined her at the observation window. The crew's excited, he said. First major deployment in 3 decades. They want to show the galaxy what we can do. They'll get their chance, Stone replied. But Neil, make sure everyone remembers why we're doing this. We're not going out there to terrify the galaxy. We're going to save civilians. The fact that we're terrifying pirates in the process is just a bonus. The Hollow Reaches Nebula glowed an eerie purple in the visible spectrum, its clouds of ionized gas stretching across 12 light-years of space. Radiation poured off the stellar remnant at its heart, enough to scramble most sensors and fry unshielded electronics within hours. Most species avoided it entirely. The Ravagers had claimed it precisely because no one else wanted it badly enough to chase them through that burning fog. Lieutenant Nina Alvarez ran her final pre-flight checks in the cockpit of her fighter, callsign Razor 7. Around her, 23 other pilots did the same, their small craft arranged in neat rows within the Indomitable's cavernous launch bay. Nina had been flying combat missions since she was 19, now 28 and leading her own squadron. She'd trained for every scenario the instructors could imagine, but this would be her first real fight. All Razor elements, this is Razor 1, she transmitted to her squadron. We're launching in 15 minutes. Intelligence shows approximately 60 Ravager vessels inside the nebula, surrounding the Cajun convoy. Our job is to establish space superiority, while the capital ships deal with the heavy targets. Remember your training. Watch your radiation exposure, and for Earth's sake, don't try to be heroes. We go in together, we come back together. Dr. James Wu stood in the Relentless's briefing theater, addressing an audience of 300 Marines who'd drawn boarding duty. These were the soldiers who'd be going on to captured Kasian ships, cutting through bulkheads if necessary to reach survivors. They needed to understand what they'd be facing. Ravagers are tough, Wu explained, bringing up a holographic image of the species. They looked reptilian to human eyes, covered in thick scales with powerful limbs. They average 7 feet tall and can lift about 300 pounds easily. Their scales can stop small-caliber rounds. They're ambush predators by evolution, patient and vicious. One of the Marines raised a hand. Sergeant Diana Ruiz, Wu noted from his briefing materials. Doc, how do they compare to humans in a fight? Wu smiled slightly. They're stronger than us, tougher in some ways. But they evolved in a world with 60% Earth's gravity. Their reaction times are slower. Their endurance is limited, and they've never faced an opponent who fights with human intensity. A Ravager will absolutely tear apart most galactic species in close combat. Against humans? He shrugged. We'll find out soon enough. But I'd bet on you every time. The Marines appreciated that assessment, judging by their grins. 3 days had passed since the convoy's distress call, and aboard the Sacred Wing, Elder Merchant Kala was leading a memorial service for 17 colonists who died when life support failed on the cargo hauler Dawn's Promise. Vanna attended despite the pressing demands on her time. These people had trusted her to lead them to a new life. Now she was watching them die one by one. Will they truly come? Asked a young Cajun mother clutching her child. The humans, I mean. Or will they let us die as punishment for what we tried to do to them? Kala was about to answer when alarms blared throughout the ship. Not proximity warnings from the Ravagers, something different. The communications officer sprinted into the memorial chamber, his iridescent skin flushed with excitement. Hi, Merchant, the humans just arrived at the nebula's edge. All 62 of their ships just appeared on long-range sensors. 62? Vanna felt her stomach drop. The message from Admiral Stone had mentioned 400 vessels. Had most of them turned back? Had humanity decided they weren't worth the full deployment? No, High Merchant, the officer said, reading her expression. These are just their scout elements. The officer I spoke with said the main fleet is 6 hours behind them. He said, and I quote, "We're here to make sure nobody leaves before the party starts." On the Ravager mothership, Scoutmaster Thren was delivering news that Warlord Krellis did not want to hear. The humans are here. Their lead elements are already entering the nebula. And Warlord, you need to see these sensor readings. They're not slowing down for the radiation. Krellis studied the display with growing unease. Human ships were burning through the nebula at velocities that should be impossible. The radiation that had made this place their safe haven was barely affecting the Deathworlder vessels. Their shielding was beyond anything he'd seen. Are they insane? Krellis muttered. The exposure alone should be killing their crews. Perhaps their crews are already dead, suggested his weapons master. Perhaps these are automated vessels. Thren shook his head. No, Warlord. We're detecting life signs. They're crude. The humans are just resisting the radiation. Krellis felt the first real tendrils of doubt creeping into his mind. The stories he'd dismissed as exaggeration, the warnings he'd ignored, suddenly seemed less like propaganda and more like tactical intelligence he should have heeded. Nina's fighter launched from the Indomitable with a burst of acceleration that would have rendered most species unconscious. She grunted against the G-forces, her specially designed flight suit squeezing her legs and torso to keep blood flowing to her brain. The fighter's inertial dampeners could only do so much. The rest was up to biology and training. Razor Squadron, spread out and begin your sweep, she ordered, adjusting course into the purple clouds. Her sensors were already picking up energy signatures. Lots of them. Razor 4, Razor 9, you're with me on the left flank. Everyone else pair up and advance by elements. The nebula was beautiful in a deadly way, streamers of glowing gas swirling past her canopy. The radiation counter clicked steadily upward, but well within safe limits for human exposure. Back home, people paid good money to get radiation doses like this for cancer treatment. Out here, it was just another environmental factor to monitor. Contact, called out Razor 5. 3 Ravager fighters bearing 270 climbing toward us. All elements weapons free, Nina commanded. Let's see what these pirates have got. The Ravager fighters had been expecting prey. They'd terrorized merchant ships for years, confident in their speed and firepower. They weren't expecting what hit them. Nina's squadron moved with coordinated precision that no Ravager could match. Centuries of human air combat doctrine, refined across countless wars and adapted for space, came into play. The human fighters accelerated past the Ravagers before the aliens could even get target locks, then flipped end over end and dove back in from above and behind. The entire engagement lasted 47 seconds. All 3 Ravager fighters tumbled away, their engines destroyed by precise fire. Nina's squadron hadn't wasted a single missile on kills when disabling shots would do. Razor 1 to all elements. Targets neutralized without casualties, Nina reported back to the carrier, advancing to next waypoint. These guys are nowhere near as tough as advertised. Aboard the Relentless, Captain Ortiz received reports from all the scout elements. The pattern was consistent. The Ravagers were dangerous by galactic standards, but completely unprepared for human combat capabilities. They fought like individuals seeking glory. Humans fought like a single organism with 400 vessels acting as limbs of one mind. "Ma'am, we have visual on the Cajun convoy," reported the sensor officer. "Confirmed 17 vessels. They're in bad shape. I'm reading critical power levels on 5 ships and minimal shields on all of them." "Time until main fleet arrival?" Ortiz asked. 4 hours, 32 minutes. "Then we hold position and keep the Ravagers busy until Admiral Stone gets here with the heavy guns." Ortiz opened a channel to the Cajun convoy. "Hi, Merchant Vanna. This is Captain David Ortiz of the Earth vessel Relentless. Please hold your position. Significant reinforcements are en route. I repeat, hold position. Help is coming." In the sacred wing, Vanna listened to those words with tears streaming down her face. Admiral Patricia Stone reviewed the tactical situation one final time before giving the order that would begin the battle. Her fleet had arrived at the nebula's edge exactly on schedule. 200 warships in perfect formation despite crossing vast distances through hazardous space. The second wave of another 200 vessels was already beginning their approach, though Stone doubted they'd be needed. The Ravagers were about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between raiding merchants and fighting a coordinated military force. "All vessels, this is Admiral Stone. We're going in on my mark. Rules of engagement are clear. Disable when possible, destroy only when necessary. The Ravagers started this fight, but we decide how it ends. Some of them might be smart enough to surrender, and I intend to give them that option. But anyone who continues firing after we offer terms goes down hard. Understood?" 200 captains acknowledged the order. Stone took a breath, then keyed the fleet-wide channel. "All ships advance. Let's go get our neighbors and teach some pirates about consequences." The iron tempest poured into the hollow reaches like a tsunami of metal and fire. The scale of it was beyond anything the Ravagers had imagined possible. They'd fought coalition forces before, beaten back military escorts, even raided a few lightly defended naval outposts. But this was different. This was an entire planetary civilization's military might, focused on a single objective. And that objective was their complete destruction. Warlord Krellis watched his tactical display with mounting horror as red icons representing human vessels filled his screens. They moved in perfect coordination, their formation never breaking despite the nebula's interference. His weapons master was shouting numbers at him. Ship counts, energy readings, missile locks. None of it was good news. All clans engage at will. Krellis roared, abandoning any pretense of strategy. "Drive them back. Show these Deathworlders that the Hollow Reaches belongs to us." The Ravager fleet surged forward to meet the human advance. 60 vessels against 200, but the Ravagers had confidence in their numbers and their experience. They'd won against worse odds before. They were predators. They were strong. They were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. The opening salvo came from the human capital ships at a range most species would consider impossible. Missiles crossed the void at velocities that redlined their safety margins, guided by targeting systems that could track individual vessels through sensor-jamming nebula clouds. The Ravagers didn't even realize they were under fire until the first impacts bloomed across their formation. 3 Ravager cruisers died in the opening seconds, their hulls torn apart by precision strikes to their reactor cores. 2 more tumbled away crippled, engines destroyed and life support failing. The remaining Ravagers scattered, abandoning their formation in panic. "Reform! Reform, you cowards!" Krellis screamed, but it was useless. His clans were used to easy victories. not facing an enemy that could swat them from the sky before they got within weapons range. Aboard the Relentless, Captain Ortiz watched the battle unfold with grim satisfaction. Tactical status on the Cajun convoy? Protected, sir. We've established a defensive perimeter. Any Ravager that gets close to those civilian ships is getting removed from the battle immediately. Good. Continue advancing. I want every pirate in this nebula either disabled or surrendered within the next 3 hours. Nina Alvarez and her fighter squadron were having the time of their lives. For years they'd trained in simulations, practiced maneuvers until they could fly them in their sleep. Now all that preparation was paying off. Her squadron danced through the nebula like performers in a deadly ballet, engaging Ravager fighters and bombers with overwhelming efficiency. Razor 7, "You've got 2 on your tail," called out Razor 4. "I see them," Nina replied, checking her displays. The Ravagers were fast, she'd give them that. But they flew like individuals, each trying to score a kill on the famous human Deathworlder. They didn't realize they were being herded. Razor 4, Razor 9 set up for crossfire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark! Nina pulled a turn that would have killed most Galactic pilots, the G-forces squeezing her chest hard enough to bruise. Her pursuers tried to follow, but their turns were wider, slower. By the time they realized their mistake, Razor 4 and Razor 9 had them bracketed from 2 different angles. Both Ravager fighters lost their weapons and engines in the same moment, left drifting helplessly. "Scratch 2 more," Nina reported. "Any of these guys want to surrender yet?" Across the battlefield, that question was being answered. The smart Ravagers, the ones who'd survived this long by knowing when to retreat, were already powering down their weapons and broadcasting surrender codes. The stubborn ones, the glory seekers who'd rather die than admit defeat, kept fighting. They died. The human Marines had trained for boarding actions in hostile environments. They'd practiced in zero gravity, in cramped corridors with live ammunition and real explosives. But training couldn't fully prepare them for cutting through bulkheads to reach survivors, while under fire from Ravager soldiers trying to kill their hostages, rather than let them be rescued. Sergeant Diana Ruiz led her platoon through a breach in the hull of a captured Cajun merchant ship. Her helmet display showed life signs deeper in the vessel, clustered in what looked like a cargo bay. Between her team and those survivors were at least a dozen Ravager soldiers. "Remember your training," Diana said to her platoon. "These things are tough and mean, but they're not faster than us and they're not smarter than us. We go through them like they're not even there." The Marines moved through the ship with practiced precision. When they encountered resistance, they dealt with it efficiently. The Ravagers were indeed tough, their scales turning aside glancing shots. But human weapons were designed to penetrate body armor, and human tactics were built around overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. One Ravager soldier tried to ambush them from a side passage. He was 7 feet of muscle and rage, armed with a plasma cutter meant for breaching ship hulls. Diana put 3 rounds through his center mass before he could swing the weapon. The Ravager fell and her platoon kept moving. They found the Cajun survivors in the cargo bay, 37 civilians huddled behind improvised barricades. 2 Ravager guards stood between the Marines and the hostages, weapons raised in threat. "Last chance," Diana said calmly, her rifle trained on the nearest Ravager. "Drop your weapons and step away from the civilians. You get to live, they get rescued, everybody goes home. Or you can try fighting, and I promise you won't like how that ends." The Ravagers looked at each other, at the armored humans who'd torn through their comrades like tissue paper, and made the smart choice. Their weapons clattered to the deck. "Medic, check the civilians," Diana ordered. "Someone get me a damage control team. This ship needs life support restored, and I want it done yesterday." Warlord Krellis knew the battle was lost. Half his fleet was destroyed or disabled. The other half was either surrendering or fleeing into the deep nebula. The humans were everywhere, their ships moving with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. And they hadn't even taken casualties. Not one human vessel destroyed. A few damaged, already being towed back for repairs, but no losses. His own mothership, the Blood Prize, was taking fire from 3 human cruisers simultaneously. His shields were failing, his weapons mostly offline. The smart move would be to surrender, to live to raid another day. But Krellis hadn't become warlord by being smart. He'd done it by being the toughest, meanest pirate in the sector. "All power to engines," he ordered. "We're running for the deep nebula. The humans can't follow us there." Scoutmaster Thren looked at him with something like pity. Warlord, our engine are damaged. We can't outrun them. Then we die trying, Krellis roared. I don't surrender to anyone, especially not to Deathworlders. The blood prize burned its remaining fuel in a desperate bid for escape. For a moment, it looked like it might work. They were pulling away from the human formation, diving deeper into the densest part of the nebula where sensors barely functioned. Then Nina Alvarez and her squadron appeared on an intercept course, their fighters moving at speeds that should have been impossible in the thick nebula clouds. They'd predicted Krellis's escape vector and positioned themselves perfectly to cut him off. Blood prize, this is the Earth Defense Force, Nina transmitted. Cut your engines and prepare to be boarded. This is your final warning. Krellis responded by firing every weapon he had left at the approaching fighters. Nina rolled her fighter through the incoming fire, laughing despite the danger. All Razor elements disable that ship. Target the engines, leave life support intact. The missiles flew true, and the blood prize became just another piece of debris drifting through the hollow reaches. The battle had ended 4 hours ago, but the real work was just beginning. Human medical teams moved through the Cajun convoy like a well-coordinated relief operation, which is exactly what it was. They'd trained for this scenario, practicing mass casualty response and disaster relief so often that it had become second nature. Now that training was saving lives that would have been lost just days ago, Commander Olivia Grant arrived aboard the Sacred Wing with 3 transport ships full of supplies. Food, water, medical equipment, replacement parts for life support systems, everything the convoy needed to survive until they could reach a proper station. She found High Merchant Vanna in what passed for the ship's command center. Exhausted but alive, Commander Grant, Vanna said, and her voice carried layers of emotion that human ears couldn't quite parse. Gratitude, shame, relief, confusion, all mixed together. I don't know how to thank you. We called for help and you came, despite everything my people did to yours. Olivia set down the supply manifest she'd been carrying and looked at the Cajun merchant directly. You called for help. That's all we needed to hear. What happened 30 years ago is history. This right now, this is the present. And in the present, you needed us. Elder Merchant Kala joined them, his advanced age showing in the pale coloring of his skin. He'd been helping coordinate the relief efforts, making sure human crews knew where the injured were clustered and which systems were most critical. I was part of the coalition that tried to quarantine your people, he said quietly. I believed the propaganda. I thought humans were dangerous primitives who would bring war to our peaceful galaxy. We are dangerous, Olivia replied with a slight smile. You just saw what we can do when we decide to fight, but we're also capable of this. She gestured to the medical teams working nearby, human doctors treating Cajun patients with the same care they'd give their own people. We're dangerous to those who hurt the innocent. We're dangerous to bullies and predators, but we're friends to anyone who needs us. The medical bay of the Relentless had been converted into a mixed-species treatment center. Human doctors worked alongside hastily briefed xenobiologists to treat both Cajun survivors and wounded ravagers. Dr. James Wu moved between patients, consulting on alien physiology and making sure nobody died from cross-species medical mistakes. A young ravager soldier lay on one of the beds, his scales pale with fear and pain. He'd taken shrapnel to his torso during the battle, and the human medical team was working to stabilize him. He looked up at Wu with confusion in his eyes. Why are you helping me? The ravager asked in broken common tongue. I tried to kill your people. Wu checked the soldier's vital signs, making adjustments to the medication drip. Because you're wounded and we have the means to help you. It's that simple. You made bad choices, fought for the wrong side, but you're still a living being who deserves medical care. When you're healed, you'll stand trial for piracy, but you'll do it alive and healthy. The Ravager didn't seem to understand this logic, but he stopped asking questions and let the humans work. Captain David Ortiz oversaw the processing of Ravager prisoners with the same efficiency he'd brought to the battle. The pirates who'd surrendered were being separated by rank and role. Leaders like Warlord Krellis, those who'd ordered attacks on civilians, they'd face serious charges. Lower-ranking soldiers who'd just been following orders, they'd get lighter sentences and opportunities for rehabilitation. Sir, we've got 53 prisoners requesting to join human merchant protection programs, reported his executive officer. They say they'd rather work for us than go back to raiding. Ortiz wasn't surprised. The Ravagers had learned in the most direct way possible that humans made terrible enemies, but potentially excellent friends. Process them through the standard screening. Anyone who checks out and is willing to work honestly can apply for provisional status. We can always use more people who know how to navigate the hollow reaches. Turn their knowledge against the pirates who are still out there. Aboard the Indomitable, Nina Alvarez and her squadron were conducting their after-action review. Every mission ended this way, pilots going through what worked and what didn't, learning from their successes and mistakes. Admiral Stone joined them for the final portion, wanting to hear directly from her fighter crews. Overall assessment? Stone asked Nina. The Ravagers were tough individually but had no concept of coordinated combat, Nina replied. Every fight came down to them trying to prove they were the best warrior while we fought as a team. It was like watching someone try to win a soccer match by just having 11 people all chase the ball at once. The other pilots laughed, tension draining from the room. They'd all survived, all come back, and none of them had needed to kill more than absolutely necessary. That was a victory worth celebrating. Good work, all of you, Stone said. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the long process of escorting the Cajun convoy to safety and making sure this sector stays secure. The fighting's over, but the real work of building something better is just beginning. High Merchant Vanna stood at an observation port on the Sacred Wing, watching human vessels move through the space around her convoy. They'd formed a protective formation, clearly planning to escort the civilian ships all the way to their destination. It was a level of commitment that would have seemed impossible just days ago. Ambassador Lyrian found her there, the Cajun diplomat looking almost as exhausted as Vanna felt. I've been receiving messages from home, Lyrian said. The High Council wants a full report on what happened here, and they're already discussing how to properly thank the humans. How do you thank someone for saving 4,000 lives? Vanna asked. How do you apologize for 50 years of prejudice and fear? You start by being honest, Lyrian replied. We were wrong about them. Not just wrong, but dangerously, arrogantly wrong. We saw their strength and assumed it meant cruelty. We saw their history of conflict and assumed they loved violence. We never stopped to ask why they fought or what they were willing to fight for. Elder Kala joined them at the viewport, 3 generations of Cajun leadership watching the human fleet. I spoke with one of their captains, Kala said. Captain Ortiz. I asked him why they risked so much for us, and do you know what he said? He said that strong people have a responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves. He said it was just the right thing to do. Such a simple philosophy, Vanna murmured, and we spent 50 years terrified of them because of it. The galactic news networks were broadcasting footage of the battle within hours. Someone had leaked sensor recordings, and now the entire galaxy was watching the Iron Tempest in action. The commentary varied wildly depending on which species was doing the talking. The Trilaxian network showed grudging respect, mixed with vindication. They'd warned everyone about human combat capabilities 30 years ago. Now here was proof they'd been right. The human fleet had destroyed a significant pirate operation in under 4 hours with 0 casualties. The Vurine Collective, a species known for their pacifist philosophy, broadcast debates about the ethics of such overwhelming force. Some argued the humans had used excessive violence. Others pointed out that the Ravagers had been terrorizing the sector for years, and someone needed to stop them. The Cajun Collective's official broadcast was more interesting. The news anchor, her skin shifting colors with strong emotion, read a statement from the High Council. For 50 years we have maintained that humanity represents a threat to galactic peace. Today we acknowledge that we were wrong. The humans did not come to conquer. They came to protect. They did not seek glory or territory. They answered a call for help from former adversaries and risked their lives to save ours. The Cajun Collective formally and publicly apologizes to humanity for our past actions and our unjust judgments. Back on Earth, the public reaction was more muted. Humanity had never sought recognition or praise for doing what they saw as basic decency. The news outlets covered the story, of course, but the general attitude was summed up by one popular commentator who simply said, "Someone needed help. We helped them. That's what neighbors do." Admiral Stone watched the news coverage from her ready room with a mixture of satisfaction and weariness. The battle had been won, the civilians saved, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was starting to understand that humans weren't the monsters the propaganda had painted them as. Commander Neil Park brought her the latest reports. "Ma'am, the Cajun convoy is ready to move. We've restored life support on all 17 vessels. transferred enough supplies to get them to their destination, and established a security detail for the journey. 3 destroyers and a support ship will escort them the rest of the way. Good work, Neil. What about the prisoners? Processed and secured. Krellis and his top officers are being transferred to a coalition detention facility for trial. The rank-and-file soldiers who surrendered are being offered rehabilitation programs. About 40 of them have requested to work with human merchant protection. Background checks are in progress. Stone nodded, satisfied. The fighting was over, but the real work of turning enemies into allies was just beginning. And that work, she knew, was more important than any battle. 6 months had passed since the battle in the Hollow Reaches, and the galaxy looked different now. The changes weren't dramatic or sudden, but rather a steady shift in how species viewed each other and themselves. The humans had proved something important in that nebula, and the ripples were still spreading outward through every sector. Ambassador Lyrian stood in the newly constructed joint embassy, a massive station built at the border between human and Kasian space. The architecture reflected both species, human efficiency blended with Kasian aesthetic grace. Behind her, workers from both civilizations put the finishing touches on what would become a symbol of cooperation between former adversaries. "It's beautiful," said High Merchant Vanna, who'd traveled from her now thriving colony specifically for the opening ceremony. "6 months ago I was preparing to die in that convoy. Now I'm watching our peoples build something together." "The Council formally revised our historical records last month," Lyrian replied. "The sections about first contact with humanity have been completely rewritten. Our children will learn the truth now, not the propaganda we told ourselves out of fear." Vanna walked to the observation window, looking out at the streams of ships passing through the joint territory. Human freighters traveled beside Kasian merchants, and mixed crews were becoming increasingly common. "Do you think we would have changed our minds without the Ravagers forcing the issue?" "Eventually," Lyrian said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "But it might have taken another 50 years of mistrust and missed opportunities. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us what really matters." On Outpost Meridian, Commander Olivia Grant was finishing her last day in that posting. She'd been promoted to Admiral and given command of the new Frontier Defense Initiative, a joint operation between Earth and 14 other species. The goal was simple: create a coordinated response force that could protect civilians anywhere in this sector, regardless of what species they belonged to. Roy Kim was staying on as the station's new commander, a promotion he'd earned through his quick thinking 6 months ago. "You sure you want to leave?" he asked Grant as she packed the last of her personal items. "This place won't be the same without you." "The station will be fine," Grant replied with a smile. "You've got good people here, and the new partnership means more resources than we've ever had. Besides, someone needs to make sure the Frontier Defense Initiative actually works. We've got a lot of species who've never worked together trying to coordinate military operations. It's going to be interesting." "That's one word for it," Roy said with a laugh. "I heard the Vurine insisted on having veto power over lethal force decisions." "They did, and we agreed," Grant confirmed. "Having a pacifist species involved keeps us honest. Make sure we're not just building another war machine. We're building something better." Former Lieutenant Nina Alvarez, now promoted to commander, ran her squadron through a training exercise with pilots from 6 different species. The exercise was simple in theory: coordinate a rescue mission in hostile territory with mixed forces. In practice, it was revealing all sorts of interesting challenges. No, she said over the comm channel, trying not to sound frustrated. "When I call for a coordinated strike, that means everyone fires at once. Not when you feel like it, not when it looks good for your personal glory. Together." A Vurine pilot, their species' first combat volunteer, spoke up hesitantly. "Commander, my people's philosophy emphasizes individual judgment. Blindly following orders seems contrary to that." Nina took a breath, reminding herself that cultural differences required patience. "I'm not asking for blind obedience. I'm asking for trust. Trust that when I call a maneuver, I'm seeing the bigger picture. You can question orders after the mission during debrief, but in combat, hesitation gets people killed. Can you do that?" There was a pause, then the Vurine replied, "Yes, Commander. I understand. We train as one, we fight as one." "Exactly. Okay, everyone reset to starting positions. We're running this drill until we get it perfect." The Hollow Reaches was no longer a pirate haven. Human patrols ran through it regularly now, and several species had established legitimate mining operations in the mineral-rich nebula. One of those operations was run by a former Ravager named Grell, who'd taken the human offer of rehabilitation and turned it into a successful business. Grell's mining crew was mixed. Humans working alongside reformed Ravagers and even a few Kasians who decided they liked the adventure of frontier work. The pay was good, the work was honest, and nobody shot at them anymore. It was a strange new life for someone who'd spent his youth raiding merchant ships. "Boss, we've got a strong mineral signature in Sector 7, called out one of his human surveyors. "Looks like refined metals, maybe a wreck." "Let's check it out," Grell replied, guiding their ship toward the coordinates. They found what they were looking for, the remains of a Ravager vessel, one that hadn't survived the battle 6 months ago. The hull was cracked open, its crew long dead, but the cargo hold was intact. "Should we salvage it?" asked one of the younger crew members. Grell thought about it, then shook his head. "No. We report it to the authorities, let them handle it properly. That's how honest people do things. Mark the location and we'll move on." The young crew member looked disappointed but didn't argue. They were learning, Grell thought. Learning that there were better ways to live than taking what you wanted by force. Admiral Patricia Stone stood before the Galactic Assembly for the first time, humanity's official representative in a forum that had once tried to cage her species. The irony wasn't lost on her. Around her, delegates from 70 species watched with varying degrees of interest and suspicion. "I've been asked to speak about the Hollow Reaches incident," Stone began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Some of you see it as proof that humans are dangerous. You're right. We are dangerous. Every species capable of defending itself is dangerous to those who would threaten it. But I want to make something clear. We didn't deploy the Iron Tempest to prove our strength. We deployed it because people needed help and we had the means to provide it." A Trilaxian delegate raised a tentacle in question. Stone recognized the gesture and nodded for them to speak. "Admiral, your fleet destroyed a significant pirate operation in a matter of hours. The speed and efficiency of your response was remarkable but also concerning. What's to stop humanity from using that same force against species you simply disagree with?" Stone had expected this question. "Accountability. Our military answers to civilian leadership. Our civilian leadership answers to the people of Earth. And our people, as you're learning, value protecting the innocent more than conquering the weak. We spent most of our history fighting each other, learning hard lessons about what happens when might makes right. Those lessons taught us that real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves." The assembly was quiet, considering her words. Then a Cajun delegate stood, his skin shifting colors as he spoke. "On behalf of the Cajun Collective, I can personally attest to the truth of Admiral Stone's words. My people were prepared to die. The humans were prepared to risk their lives to save us. That is the difference between strength and cruelty." More delegates began to speak, some skeptical, others supportive. The debate would continue for weeks, Stone knew. But the conversation had shifted. They weren't debating whether to quarantine humanity anymore. They were debating how to work with humans as partners in maintaining galactic security. Back on Earth, in a small apartment in Seoul, a news alert chimed on a display. The message was brief but significant. Another distress signal had been detected, this time from the far side of the galactic rim. "A colony under attack by raiders." They were calling for help. Admiral Olivia Grant received the same alert in her new office aboard the Frontier Defense Initiative headquarters. She looked at her staff, representatives from 15 different species all watching her expectantly. "Well," Grant said, pulling up star charts and plotting courses. "Someone needs help. That's what we're here for." She opened a fleet-wide channel. "All vessels, this is Admiral Grant. We have a situation developing in the Outer Rim. A colony is under attack and has requested assistance. Prepare for immediate deployment. We've got people to save." Her staff moved with practiced efficiency, coordinating ships from a dozen different species. The response fleet wouldn't be as large as the Iron Tempest, but it would be fast, coordinated, and more than capable of handling raiders. Commander Roy Kim, monitoring from Outpost Meridian, smiled as he watched the new fleet form up and jump to hyperspace. This was what the galaxy needed. Not one species acting alone, but many working together. The humans had shown everyone what was possible. Now others were learning to follow that example. High Merchant Vanna received word of the deployment while visiting the joint embassy. She immediately contacted her trading consortium, arranging for supply ships to follow the military fleet. If there were refugees from this attack, they'd need food, medicine, shelter. The Casians had learned from being on the receiving end of humanitarian aid. Now they wanted to pay it forward. The galaxy was changing, one rescue mission at a time. Species that had barely spoken to each other were now coordinating disaster relief. Races that had viewed each other with suspicion were learning to trust. And in the center of it all, humanity continued doing what they'd always done, answering calls for help, protecting the vulnerable, and proving that the scariest monsters in the galaxy could also be its greatest heroes. The Iron Tempest would deploy again someday. Everyone knew that. But hopefully next time it wouldn't be alone. Hopefully, other species would stand beside humanity, learning to face threats together rather than cowering separately. That was the real victory from the Hollow Reaches. Not the destruction of pirates, but the birth of genuine cooperation. On a human colony world, a young child looked up at the stars and asked their parent what it was like out there in deep space. The parent smiled and told them about the Casian convoy, about Admiral Stone and Commander Grant, about how humans had gone into a deadly nebula to save people they'd never met, from a species that had once tried to cage them. Why did they do it? The child asked. Because someone needed help, the parent replied. And that's what good neighbors do. That's what we do. The child looked back at the stars, imagining all those distant worlds and the people living on them. Someday, maybe they'd be out there too, answering distress calls and standing between the innocent and those who'd hurt them. It was a good dream, a worthy dream. The Iron Tempest slept in its orbital berths, cruise on ready status but not deployed. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Most had anyway. And for those who hadn't, who still thought civilians were easy targets, the fleet waited patiently, ready to remind them that monsters didn't prey on the weak in this galaxy anymore, not when the Deathworlders were watching.